Okay, welcome to Greetings from the Future, Tales from the Metaverse. Today we're going to be talking about immersive journalism, which is changing journalism as we see it. It's a slow progression, but it's starting to happen. There are some people that actually say that journalism is dead because of some of the technologies that we'll speak about later. But I believe that journalism is just evolving, and we'll see better journalism, more immersive journalism, and more importantly, journalism that involves people rather than people looking in. Chris, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, journalism is dead. I don't know if it can ever happen because as long as people do exist and they have something to report, whatever it may be, even if there are just 3 or 4 people left on this planet, they will have to talk to each other and they have to report about stuff. And in a way, it's somehow journalism to give information from one person to the other. And yes, I mean, immersive journalism, or I would push it a little bit further. Journalism in the metaverse is for sure a very, very interesting point because you will see so many other use cases and other types of stories, narratives, ways of presenting information. Think about all the metadata that we will find in the metaverse, right? And how we can deal with this to bring better, deeper, more interesting information to the people. So there is a lot to cover.
Right. Eric, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, based on what Chris was saying, I have a couple of comments on that. I feel like, first off, when people reporting, I feel like some people, they need to report what meals they're eating and everywhere they're attending and going and checking in because they really want everybody to know where they are. And unfortunately, that is a part of journalism. You know, it's just a matter of, are the people that are seeing this stuff, do they care of what you're reporting? You know, that is open to interpretation. But the first thing that I kind of want to comment on it is the filter journalism. So if we bring out a camera and somebody's filming something that is actually happening and there's no filter on it, I feel like that is a very genuine moment that was happening. Now, a filter is always open to interpretation because it can make something look better than what it did. It's like editing maybe the beginning of the clip out or how it ends. You know, that's a version of filtering out some of the information. And the same thing is, you know, adding these filters on an effect to make something look differently than what it really happened. So I think that is a very important part of journalism. I think that there's a lot of people that want to see something authentic and real. And I think that's what is important for us to get back to, which is, if you're going to report something, people should be able to know, you know, what really kind of happened if they want to.
Yeah, but you know, I think your use of the term filter is being generous in that, you know, particularly video, audio, images can be manipulated. In fact, you know, we have a good example right now out there of a deep fake with ex-President Trump talking about joining one of the Russian alternatives to YouTube because he was banned from YouTube. And so, you know, the question right now is this a really good deep fake, or is it ex-President Trump actually talking about that? And this has been something that, you know, has plagued journalism for years and years. And that's, you know, fake news, where the objective of a newspaper or a news organization, you know, the bottom line objective is to make money. And so occasionally money and ethics collide. So yeah, I mean, I think we're in an age where everyone has a cell phone, and I think that really has promoted the fact that if you happen across something newsworthy, you get out your cell phone and you start streaming or you start videoing, and you then upload it to all of the social media channels where, in the old days, if an event happened, you had to send a journalist there by car in most cases. It took a couple of hours sometimes to drive there, or days if they had to fly there. And, the journalists were really the only people on the ground recording the event. Today, in my experience, one of my big peeves when I used to be active and out in the field was that you have so many people that are, we call them citizen journalists, with their cell phones that are standing right in the middle of the shot. We, as professional journalists, didn't object to elbowing someone out of the way or pushing someone out of the way for a better shot. But when you have, these hordes of people standing right in front of the shot because they're using a cell phone, which in most cases doesn't have a telephoto lens, or the digital telephoto doesn't give you the same resolution that, a glass camera telephoto lens would, you have to get up close. And so we're competing with these citizen journalists. And the question again becomes, and we're seeing, newspapers going out of business, media outlets going out of business simply because there is too much information out there.
I mean, for sure, this point of is there are there so many people that are producing information at the moment that professional journalism is not necessary anymore? I truly believe into the fact that journalism has a very special meaning. That means there are people that have an education will be able to get around and work with facts, with information differently than someone who hasn't got that education, is not, let's say, fixed to some standards. Journalists, you should have some standards, at least for yourself. If it's not coming from your company, but for yourself, you should think about that you are always regarding both sides. If there are just two sides, for example, you have to always to see both sides. You have to be as neutral as you can, even if it's very, very heavy to do that sometimes. It depends on the topic, and so on and so on. So, in my opinion, professional journalism is not really suffering too much from the, let's say, citizen reporter, as you call them. Sure, you can see lots of people when something is happening running around with their smartphones and taking pictures. And they will upload them. They will push them out to any kind of a platform that is there. But is that information not just a little chunk of the, let's say, of reality? It's not, in my opinion, it's not really journalism, because there is no work on facts, on backgrounds. Journalist, let's say, who is going to a press conference to talk about war in Ukraine today or whatever, should always take all the information into consideration and say, okay, had a talk with minister of whatever, and he told us this and that and stuff and here and there, and then the background information will be feeded in, will be categorized and implemented, and so on and so on. And the citizen reporter will probably not do that, right? So
No, you're right, but then what about some of these news channels that have propagated the fact, for example, that ex-President Trump won the election and continued to propagate this misinformation? At what point do we say these people should not be, and one of the problems we have here in the United States is that there is no accreditation of journalists. I was going to say, should not be accredited, but that doesn't apply here in the United States. In South Africa, when I was a journalist, I had to be issued with a press pass that was issued by a police department, and there was accreditation. Here, you can basically pay $50 or whatever and get a little badge that says you're a journalist. And, I think, again, part of the problem in the United States is that we really need to make journalism more of a profession where you're held to standards that, we all know there's ethics that we need to abide to, but people don't. And, again, they're trying to sell sensationalism. Eric.
Make journalism great again.
Yeah, no, that's a good slogan, definitely.
The one thing that I was thinking based on what all you guys were saying, I believe with the technology of where we're going and the way GPS is mapped and everything like that, and let's say an event is taking place, these citizen journalists, they could now all of a sudden you have all this access to accessibility. You have a camera filming there live, and they could be on the phone with the dispatcher, getting this next level of training. And now all of a sudden, or different people that are at the location, they're uploading footage. So now there's different camera angles. The whole thing is documented. We have all these camera people, and now a really authentic story could be pieced together based on what was happening, because now people are able to get away. You're not able to sweep under the rug certain things where, like when you were talking about, it could take a couple hours for somebody to show up. Well, things can be cleaned up in a few hours, and a story could be, well, it didn't go down that way, and you only got one person who was kind of there witnessing it. And now I feel like we're at a time to where you're going to be able to get away with less than you were able to get away with before. I feel like people are being held, with the capabilities that we have now, if it's utilized properly, people are going to be held accountable for their actions, which at the end of the day, I think that is the way it should be.
Okay, but
Yeah.
is that really journalism? Maybe we have to clarify this term journalism. In my opinion, from what I have learned, and I worked with a lot of journalists in all the TV stations I was working in, and it's more the work of fact checking, of getting the story together, not just going somewhere, take the camera and document right now at the moment what's happening. It is one part of that. But the even bigger part is, if there's a demonstration, for example, you have to know what are those people standing for. You have to do interviews. You have to do research before on the topic, if it's about the environment or whatever. So there's much more work, and just having 4 cameras, that will show you what happened there. So if someone says, oh, there was a violent group of people and they whatever trashed stuff on the streets and whatever, they were violent, and the 4 cameras show no violence at all, it's a fact, and it's important to have that. But journalism for me is much more. It's much more work in the background and giving all these meta information, let's say, basically information that is not yet there, to be researched, to be categorized, and that work, that's journalism for me.
You both bring up some interesting points. I mean, I agree with you, Chris, that journalism is a lot about fact checking, and that's one of the problems with people randomly sending clips or whatever else to a newsroom, is that there is no assurance that what's being sent is actually real. It might look real, but it might be dated, it might be some other protest, or whatever. So there's a lot more fact checking that needs to be on into if one uses that approach. The other issue is that cameras do lie, in that depending on the angle that you're shooting from, you may portray something or a situation that is totally different to the actual situation that is going on. And I think, that's one of the reasons that immersive journalism is very important, in that it enables a viewer to actually stop being a viewer and being a participant in the news, to actually step into the news. So, here we have a definition, thanks to Wikipedia. Immersive journalism is a form of journalism production that allows first-person experience of events or situations described in news reports and documentary film, using 3D gaming and immersive technologies that create a sense of being there and offer the opportunity to personally engage with a story. Immersive journalism puts an audience member directly into the event by accessing a virtual version of the location where the story is occurring as a witness participant, or by experiencing the perspective of a character depicted in the news story. The audience could be afforded unprecedented access to the sights and sounds and even the feeling and emotions which accompany the news. So, this is happening slowly, but there are issues with it. And, we'll talk about some of the issues in a little bit. Thoughts, Chris?
Well, yeah, I mean, for sure. Today, let's say when we start with technology in that case, absolutely, you can take a 360 camera to a place and use that as the footage. No doubt about that. Would be one part. That's more or less the equivalent to the classical report that we know with the standard camera. In that case, you really have the whole 360 environment, for example. On top of that, what you could do, it depends a lot on the topic for sure. You can recreate 3D models, environments, whatever, if you are making a documentary about ancient Egypt, for example. Sure, you can go with the 360 camera to the pyramids and show what's there today. But then you can, for example, you could just transfer scene into a 3D model. You can walk around in whatever, a pyramid outside to inspect some statues or whatever kind of stuff. So you have much more possibilities. You can give much more information, especially in an environment, because again, it is immersive and you can walk around, you can see everything in the real world scale, how it maybe looked 3,000 years ago, and so on and so on. It's much more work technically, but it's possible, sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting approach, in that, we're no longer reporting on current events. We're now recreating an event that occurred, as you say, many, many years ago, and providing visuals of that. And I think that, that is going to be, definitely one part of this, where, instead of seeing a film of, say, the Titanic or whatever, one is actually going to be able to go onto the Titanic and experience some of the horror that people experienced as it was going down. So definitely something that's happening in the future. Eric.
Excuse me.
So
I have a question. Are we asking questions?
Yeah,
Hello.
if you have a question, you can come in. But in that case, please come to the red couch, because we're filming this, and that's where the
Yes.
camera is looking to. Is she
Fine.
able to come?
So as she's coming and getting in position, my comment that I think from another standpoint that would be called journalism is, now let's say somebody is speaking press conference before a sporting event, or an official is coming in and going to be doing a press release. Now the environment could be created ahead of time. So instead of watching it on the television, somebody like Madame here could be at the actual event and really in the audience, and they could even really ask the question instead of sitting there at looking at their TV going, I would have loved to ask a question of this people. So now it really creates a more interactive for people from different places in the world that can actually want to be there and experience it and be like, yeah, I was there when they were talking about these things. So it really is some unprecedented things that the technology is going to be able to bring as
There are
far
a
as
You
lot
the
mean
of
like
possibilities.
now,
journalistic
like our
experience.
Exactly.
virtual newsroom here?
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
So
Madame,
Good.
my
your
Well,
question.
question actually flows into that a little bit with the 3D cameras and the sources of having the photography right there to be able to catch that immediate expression and scene that's going on. However, my question would be, is journalism now going toward having the people make their own opinion about the portrayed events instead of having the journalist go home, go back to the business, do their research, and then give what they perceive to be the encounter that happened? So the people are actually making their own point of view. And I believe, and I don't want to step on toes. I know I did come in late, but the government is taking away the ability from journalism to be able to get their point of view across. I believe they're wanting to take that on for themselves to put in the news media what's happening so that they can gauge how people are going. And I think the people are taking it back for themselves, saying, hey, we want to be right up front, and this is what we have. You make your own opinions.
Right, but
a very, very important point. We've seen, governments, totalitarian governments. One of their first targets is the news organizations because they want to put out news that they want people to hear. And so, the opposite of that is what we're seeing these days is where news is being presented with a slant. And, I think since the beginning of time, most news outlets have had a certain slant, whether they're conservative leaning or liberal leaning. But whatever the slant, in my opinion, news should be presented as something to inform people of and allow them to make their own opinion of it. It shouldn't be presented in a slanted way that basically shows people, one aspect of what's going on according to that particular news outlet or according to
Absolutely.
the government. Great point.
I mean, what comes to my mind in this case is, isn't it in a first way all about trust in a way? Like if you are watching, let's say, a press conference from the president or whatever, you will get directly with one camera, for example, what the person said. You can believe it or not. He's going to talk about whatever. And then the big question is that information enough for you? Or do you
Right.
think, well, I would like to have a journalist, someone who's on this topic, if let's say the environment, climate change, whatever, and the president is talking about that, and you say, well, okay, the president said that, but is there someone who's getting around with this topic for 20 years, talking to a scientist and bringing me more information, more background information, because I hadn't got the time to dig into this. I cannot be on 200 topics that you get to see every day. So there, in my opinion, is the point where journalism is jumping in. But for sure, this is a lot about the consumer. If she or he likes to say or will say, well, yeah, I really do need more information. Or if people say, well, okay, I heard what the president has to say, I'm good with that. And I will interpret it myself and I don't care about some other, you know, background info or stuff.
So, Chris, are you essentially saying that the media will portray the journalism of one topic, let's just say the president speaking. And then the public will go and fill in the background on why he said that and where he said that and upload information that has been photographed prior to him speaking so that we could fill in the gaps.
I would say it's probably more like if you think about today, there's a press conference, and then you will have a newsroom, and in the newsroom, whatever, a journalist, a scientist, depends on the topic, will discuss those points, and they will try to bring more information, more background information. You said, for example, it's also possible, and especially with this whole topic, metaverse and new technologies, for sure, and we can see that already. The president is talking, giving his points. Twitter will directly see hundreds, maybe thousands of tweets. People will give their ideas, their thoughts, and so on and so on directly while he's speaking. Big question is that journalism, or is it just people having their ideas? What is completely fine, but is that on the term journalism, or is that something else? In my
I think
opinion, it's
that's
not
something
journalism.
else.
Yeah,
think,
I would agree.
yeah,
I think it's definitely something else. It's
yeah.
yeah, even though, people have tried to make Twitter into journalism, and I mean, I think Twitter to me is more of journalism, just spewing out thoughts at the moment in very short form, where journalism should involve, as Chris mentioned, research, developing a story, and all of the things that go with journalism.
See,
In terms of the public, I think that the most important thing that many people are lacking is critical thinking skills, which, make the job of some of these outlets much easier when they feed people information and people just look at this information and say, yeah, that's the situation. I believe it. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to, try to dissect the situation. I'm just going to accept this news outlet on their word. And that, goes back to this issue of trust, where, over the last couple of years, we've really eroded the trust that journalists have had in the past. Journalists were a respected group of people. Now, I mean, I've been attacked myself by, people for being a journalist because, supposedly, I would report fake news, which seems to be a badge that all journalists now have attached to them. That, you're a journalist, well, you're reporting fake news. Eric.
So, part of based on this argument, what I would say would be an amazing way that the news could be viewed in the future is, okay, let's say you want news on a certain topic that's coming out. Instead of it all being skewed to like what they think that you should say, I would love to have like a court case almost, both sides of the arguments of not just the conspiracy theorists, not just like what the mainstream narrative is, like both kind of cases. We're trying to figure out what the truth is, but here is what these journalists are saying, and here's what these journalists are saying, and then we're trying to put together what the actual truth is as well. And I think that's what the bottom line is people want to know genuinely what happened. And I think the most common case is that anytime somebody dies, like the first thing that people always want to know is how did they die. And when they don't reveal that facts, people are reading the story, well, okay, but how did they die? That's the determining the cause of death. And it's like somebody will go back and revisit the story because they want to know like how what happened there.
It's almost
I
like,
mean,
how did journalism die?
Right.
yeah, we
Well,
already talked about that in the beginning. Like, is journalism going to die? As one, I think, said basically. Again, I think as long as there are people, they are probably interested in information and also in the backgrounds, in my opinion. And it's there is for the big topics, there is so much information that has to be processed. Um, you will always need someone to do that. And traditionally, journalists would be the job to do it. And when we come to virtual journalism or journalism in virtual reality, I think our picture here from Noni de la Peña is a great example, right? That's why you probably brought that up. Madam, I don't know if you ever saw something from Noni de la Peña on some of her work.
I
She
have
is
not.
something. Sorry,
I have not. No.
if not, okay. She is probably yeah the first person who did journalism in virtual reality because she was working together with Lucky Palmer, and he was inventing the Oculus, not the Quest, but the first headset. He was working on a project. He wanted to make a virtual reality headset, and that's when he met Noni de la Peña, and she was doing the first journalistic content for headset like the Oculus, and he did very interesting projects like visualizing a bomb explosion in Iraq, for example. You could step into that and things like that. So she was really taking story into immersion, and I think that's the big difference to seeing pictures on a two-dimensional screen or reading the newspaper, being able to step into a situation and try to let that sink in.
Quick
Thoughts?
question. Quick
Yes,
question
madam.
on VR.
Yes.
If you actually have a camera somewhere, are you able to project that camera live in VR, or is it always delayed?
No, you can project it live. You can,
Wow.
for example, stream to YouTube or stream to Twitch or, whichever streaming platform you like, and then you can bring it up on
Oh,
a screen. As you see behind you, we have a PowerPoint
that's right.
presentation, but that could be a Twitch video screen in real time. And
Mm.
we've in fact, done that where a couple of conferences we've had real-time events going on displayed on the screen. We've had Zoom calls where participants have actually joined us during a Zoom conference, and we've had them on the screen. So yeah, I mean,
I see.
it's becoming, technology is evolving, and as everyone knows, we are in beta here on All Space VR, and so every couple of months there's something new that I think is going to help us. But right now we and as I say this, I mean, 5G is rolling out in many places. The unfortunate thing is that millions of Americans still don't have broadband access, but that's another issue. These technologies are really helping people or helping journalists get, I mean, in the past, I mean, give you an example. Back in the old days, most stuff had to be done by courier. If you took film, it had to be put on an airplane, sent somewhere. When we did still photography, we had an early version of something that looked like a fax machine. And basically, once the image was printed, it was taken straight out of the, fixer, splashed with some water to just wash it quickly, slapped wet on this fax machine, and then faxed out to the various outlets that the newspaper was serving. And that goes back to I think a point that you made earlier, Eric, where a lot of journalism is time competing for that scoop, and so the time that it would take to analyze multiple feeds, analyze multiple contributions, that really, I think, is appropriate when the story isn't time sensitive, and one has the time to do that. But generally, in a newsroom, if you're a daily, particularly, you're fighting against time. You're looking at breaking news, what's happening, and sometimes you'll have to shift story.
Right, you can use a drone to fly over. It depends a lot on what you're doing. There were so many different documentaries made in 360. If someone was mounting the 360 camera to a helicopter, I guess what Eric said, it will get interesting when people are able to join and interact. That will be the place.
Yeah.
Like being in the metaverse, and also what you said, Eric, was very interesting. To have additional information. So meanwhile, let's say you're in the press conference and you can get lots of information in the metaverse from various providers, and you can, let's say again, the president is speaking, you get sentences already highlighted, and when he's talking about some whatever kind of values or numbers, in the background, an AI system could already seek them up and check them. For example, fact checking in real time, stuff like that. I think combining everything in the metaverse, that will probably lead us into a new type of journalism. Again,
Absolutely. Yes.
I mean, I love it, right? Because the fact checking and the, journalists and the person who said something. Why is it such a problem for people to say, you know what, I misquoted that, and then it's like an amendment and it's adjusted, and that's okay. We're not perfect, right? So we can move towards like this accurate level of news. The one thing that I wanted to say with this that I feel like is a news story is when you brought up 5G, is this was a huge controversial topic. Is 5G good or is it bad? People don't want it up in their places. And I feel like that's people that were trying to resist where technology is going. Like, no, no, no. You don't want 5G close to your house. There's all these, there was good stories put out and bad stories put out. So I feel like we would have even more 5G right now if some of the people who probably controlled 4G weren't ready for 5G to come out because they aren't done collecting the money that they needed to make from the 4G technology. Because the minute it becomes obsolete, it doesn't hold much value. So,
Yeah, but
on to the next.
technology will always become obsolete, and I think there's always going to be people that are, Luddites, so to speak, where they're have a fear of technology, and one can't argue that there's a lot of RF floating through the the air, and yeah, it could have a harmful effect if you get too close to it. So if if you sat on a base station, you probably will end up getting radiation burns eventually. But I think we just need to move on. I mean, a good example that Chris brought up, and it really doesn't have anything to do with the metaverse, but is drones, where previously, to do any type of aerial video or photography, news organization had to either rent a helicopter or buy millions of dollars worth. And today, for a few $1,000s, one can launch a drone and get even better shots than one could get with a helicopter because of the compactness of the drone and where the drone can go. So there's a lot of opportunities out there when it comes to technology. We just can't blow it off and say, well, we're not comfortable with this, and so we're not going to adopt it. I mean, it goes back to the early days of the typewriter, when the word processor replaced the typewriter. There were people that were throwing up their arms and saying, I will never go to the word processor. It's just a fad. It's I'm going to stay with the typewriter. And those people lost their jobs because, the typewriter basically went out of fashion. As a journalist, I mean, I remember typing, and it's like every time I made a mistake, whiteout, and you know, and it really affects the way that one writes as well, because if you realize that this is going to look messy if I don't really think about every word I put in here, and check the spellings and etc. I mean, it just is a tedious process. When I first used the word processor, it was like, wow, I can just write and I don't have to care about grammar, spelling, anything initially, so I can let my creative juices flow, so to speak. Then I can go back and edit what I've written, and bang, no more whiteout. And to me, that was like amazing.
I mean, that is for sure technology that makes life easier. It gave you more possibilities to work faster and more convenient in that case, because you hadn't got all these restrictions with the technical machine, let's say. This is one important point, and that will adopt also for the new technologies and also in the metaverse. My opinion is always like, how is journalism, how are the stories, how are the narratives changing just because we have those possibilities? Where can they bring us forward, right? I think that's the big idea or the big question in this. I'm sure we will see a lot of new story types and different ways to approach facts, present them in a different way. It does not mean that it's a better type of journalism. It will be a different one. And first, I hope it will be more understandable. It will be easier to be accessed by the people. That is my first hope, I'd say.
I think if it gets to being real and authentic and more genuine, it will definitely be better journalism.
A lot of the times you have people saying their opinions and they say it immediately because it's a video. Now it's uploaded, it's what is happening right now, off their brain, out of their mouths. And in today's society of I want it uploaded now, yesterday, then we don't take the time to actually stop and think what we want to put on the paper. We don't stop to think what's coming out of our mouth. It just flows out. So it's twofold. One side is good, one side maybe not, but it definitely brings the forefront of the feeling of the people.
You bring up a good point there with the immediacy of getting stuff out, and one of my pet peeves is I will bet I mean I'd lay $10,000 on the table right now to say that if you logged on to one of the news apps like Google News or one of the other apps and went through each article, that you will find mistakes and errors. We've gone from an age where in the traditional newsroom you used to have an editor, and today, as you say, for expediency, speed, whatever, we just write it, we slap it on whatever, and often it's riddled with spelling mistakes, grammatical mistakes. It's just amazing to me that, and and these aren't just blogs. They're the Guardian, New York Times, other publications like
John,
that.
no reason to call these people out by name. I'm sure all of them are making mistakes at this point.
Yeah, but you would expect some of these larger organizations not to make a mistake, because I again think that a mistake in an article, particularly if it's a journalistic article, reflects on both the article
Right.
and the organization.
True.
Totally, but that's where a lot of these people are probably, having trouble now from a media standpoint as far as budgets, because of where journalism is switched, and they're probably relying on advertisers. So the advertisers are helping dictate what is getting out there, what is getting the extra stuff to make sure it does have the eyes on it and it's correct. So unfortunately, that's part of the shift that everything is going through.
I would tend
Um,
to agree with you. However, the main articles that are very important do have the mistakes as well.
okay, fair
Yeah,
enough.
it's
So this
unfortunate. It's
this is an interesting chart right here. If you could break this down for us, John, I'm looking at all the different ways that we can the 360 story centric approach here. Looks like there's a
Actually,
lot of
yeah.
different
before
ways.
we do that, I'd like to say thank you for having me on, and I do need to go, but I appreciate the time.
Oh, madam,
Yeah.
nice meeting you,
Thank
and
you.
Yes,
thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes.
thank you.
So what we have on the screen here is, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about virtual newsrooms. And this is a 360 story centric approach where basically that middle circle is a virtual newsroom. And then we have all of the inputs, coming from photographers, Twitter, people with cell phones, etc., feeding into this virtual newsroom, which then creates stories out of what is coming in and pushes those stories out to social media, mainstream media, etc. So, this is something that, I think we all, look at COVID as being this terrible thing. And yes, it is, millions of people have died, but there is also a positive aspect to the last 2 years in that it's really pushed technology. And it's pushed technology in the newsroom area where we're starting to see more and more virtual newsrooms where a news person can now appear from their home and it looks like they're actually in a newsroom. There's companies out there actually that specialize in building these virtual newsrooms for people or news organizations. So again, this is just one of the approaches that's used. It's interesting to look at.
100%. And the only one thing that I wanted to say, like with that, I think news is it's interesting reporting because we always want to report it as current day present stuff. But how about the news on a story from 40, 50 years ago that there's still survivors that are 70, 80 years old that now we put in that concept of a virtual newsroom and we can recreate the story based on the survivors who experienced that while they're still here, and then creating an immersive experience to where people could go in and experience it. Anyways,
That goes back to Chris's comment, of recreating these experiences that, that are dated and letting people see what it was like to, be in those days. So, the next slide that I have up here basically, goes to what we've been talking about. Chris mentioned AI, and I think AI is definitely an important tool or becoming an important tool when it comes to journalism. And so we have, applications these days like Jasper that can do copywriting, which takes a lot of the burden off, having to flesh out an article. You can basically generate an article and then spend time fine tuning it. Video editing, where, instead of looking for every scene change manually using programs like Premiere, we can actually have the program insert cuts wherever it thinks scenes change. Transcription services, I mean, those are
Yeah,
totally amazing. I mean, every couple of months they seem to get more amazing where
yeah,
you
definitely.
don't even need to have a word processor anymore. You can just speak out your article and have it
Yeah.
transcribed. And then, event detection, which, a lot of us in the journalistic world, we're continuing to do things like look through Twitter, look through Reddit for news stories, because that's when it breaks. It's the news, if you look at it, starts on the periphery, the edges, and so you might see a Twitter tweet about something that's going on, but it's just a very low level tweet. And
Mm.
in my experience, what I've seen is it takes 2 to 3 days for that particular event, unless it's something major like Russia attacking Ukraine, to actually appear in the news. And so with event detection, one can get early notification of, oh, this might be, a newsworthy story without you having to spend hours and hours and hours going through some of these, adjunct news services, if you will. So we're,
And
almost coming to the end of today's session. We've been joined by Charlie and ShareBear. Do you guys have any questions, any thoughts that you would like to add?
No, I'm good. I thank you, though. It was very
No,
interesting.
no, good. Thank you.
awesome.
So let's, anything else, Chris, Eric?
Yeah, for me, I just wanted to give this idea about our little documentary you're doing here. I mean, it always for me comes also back to the metaverse and where it comes together. And when we think about all these additional, on one hand, technologies, but also on this additional data that will be floating into journalism, and as you described it very well, um, journalists will have to get around with them, and those approaches, technologies, workflows will help them to do so. And I think the metaverse, as we experience it here in VR, is also somehow very similar because we are using data in a different way. Everything we see around here is data. It's three-dimensional data. It's spoken words transmitted into data, and the metaverse is putting it together for us humans in a more and better way to experience it. So instead of just hearing your voice, I can see you. I can see you as a person, and so on. I hope that all these metadata that is in the metaverse will give much more possibilities to the journalists to make even better stories. And the metaverse should give them tools to experience them by themselves and create world environments or stories that are usable, that can be then experienced by the viewer or by the reader or consumer, however.
So what I think, Chris, I love all that. And this is such another huge topic that can go so many ways. The immersive experience that I would love to see on this is almost through the technology. The example I want to use is the phone, like telling the story of how it kind of evolved from the switchboard and being plugged in to where like we create some immersive experiences to where like people could see what you had to do with going through the phone call when you first had to pick up and then you had to tell somebody, like there was no even buttons, like you had to give instructions on who they were patching you in with, and there was only so many lines available, because that stuff's very factual of how it evolved. Like the journalism in that, I don't know if it'd be necessarily an opinion piece, it's more factual, but I still believe that's an element of journalism too, because you're working with hard facts on how something went about, and then to collect people's thoughts and what it was like for them to experience the phone to being cordless. And because we have like people who are 80, 90 years really kind of got to experience the phone evolution. And yeah, I think that could be amazing to take like an 80-year-old and be like, yeah, I remember that with their grandkid of like, this is how it used to be. And there's so much power in that, of seeing the history of how things came about.
Well,
So
there's an interesting story in that, which I'll tell in closing because we're running a little time. So the reason that the telecommunication system moved from operator switching to mechanical switching was due to a funeral home owner called Stowinger. And Stowinger, I believe, lived in Michigan. And he was one of the two funeral home owners in this particular town. And he believed that the telephone operator was favoring the competition and putting calls through to the competition rather to him. And so he actually developed first mechanical telephone switch, which is actually called the Stowager switch. It's no longer in use because we
It's
don't use
unbiased.
mechanical switches anymore for the most part. But that enabled people to bypass the operator and actually dial a call. So, little interesting story to end. Any closing thoughts, Chris?
I mean, we talked about a lot of things, and I think we could talk about this topic for another 10 times at least, because there is so much to it.
Yes, definitely.
But yeah,
We've
I
just
really liked
touched
it
on the
a lot.
topic.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. So next week we're going to be talking about democracy and the metaverse and how the metaverse has the potential to change democracy or is changing democracy. So thank you everyone for attending today. This was a great session. As you say, Chris, we could go for a few more hours or days on the topic of journalism and journalism in the metaverse.